Commander HFY clutched the emergency communicator with all four of his trembling hands. The blue blood seeping from his wounded chest had turned his white ceremonial armor into a crimson mess. Around him, the command center of Outpost 7 buzzed with the chaos of a losing battle. Holographic displays showed red warning indicators across every defensive sector. The Krillian invasion fleet had broken through their outer perimeter 3 cycles ago, and now the monsters were closing in on their final stronghold. "All stations report critical damage," announced his communications officer, her voice cracking with fear. "Shield generators are down to 20% power. Weapon systems are failing across the station." HFY watched the tactical display with growing horror. The Krillians weren't just winning, they were playing with their prey. Their massive dreadnoughts hung back like patient predators while smaller assault craft darted in and out of the station's defenses, picking apart weapon emplacements one by one. Each attack was calculated, methodical. They were enjoying the hunt. "Sir," called out Lieutenant Vorn from the sensor station, "we're detecting movement in the lower sections. They've breached hull integrity on decks 12 through 15. Boarding parties are advancing toward the civilian shelters." The commander's heart sank. 3,000 civilians were huddled in those shelters, families, children, elderly beings who had fled here when the Krillians first appeared in their system. The thought of what those monsters would do to them made his stomach turn. The Krillians didn't take prisoners. They took trophies. "How long until the evacuation ships can return?" he asked, though he already knew the answer. 6 cycles, minimum," Vorn replied. "The civilian transports barely escaped the first wave. They won't risk coming back while the Krillian fleet is still here." 6 cycles. They didn't have 6 minutes, let alone 6 cycles. HFY looked around at his crew. Good beings, all of them. They had fought bravely, but they weren't warriors. The Galactic Coalition prided itself on being a peaceful alliance of civilized species. Their military was designed for exploration and defense, not warfare against savage monsters like the Krillians. "Sir, we're receiving a transmission from Krillian Command," the communications officer announced. "Put it through." The main display flickered, and suddenly, they were looking at the nightmare face of a Krillian war chief. Its 6 eyes glowed with predatory satisfaction, and its mouth full of razor-sharp teeth split into what might have been a grin. Bone trophies from various species dangled from its scarred hide, and fresh blood stained its claws. "Coalition weaklings," the war chief hissed in broken galactic standard. "Your pitiful resistance ends now. Surrender, and we will make your deaths educational. Fight, and we will feast on your young while you watch." HFY felt his crew recoil in horror behind him. He straightened his shoulders and tried to project strength he didn't feel. "This is Commander HFY of Coalition Outpost 7. We will never surrender to monsters like you." The war chief's laugh was like grinding metal. "Monsters? We are evolution perfected. We are what your soft species fear in the dark. Soon, your blood will join our collection." The transmission cut off. "Commander," his tactical officer spoke up, his voice barely above a whisper. "What are your orders?" HFY stared at the tactical display. They had maybe 20 functional defense turrets left. Their shield generators were failing. Hull breaches were spreading. And somewhere in the lower decks, Krillian boarding parties were hunting innocent civilians. He activated his personal communicator and opened a channel to Coalition High Command. The signal would take time to reach them across the vast distances of space, but maybe someone would hear their final message. Maybe someone would remember what happened here. "This is Commander HFY of Outpost 7. He spoke into the device. "We are under attack by a Krillian invasion force. Estimated enemy strength, 12 dreadnoughts, 40 assault cruisers, and countless smaller vessels. Our defenses have failed. Civilian casualties are imminent." He paused, gathering his courage for what came next. "We are requesting immediate reinforcements. Any available military assets in the sector, please respond. We cannot hold much longer." As if summoned by his words, another explosion rocked the station. Emergency lighting bathed the command center in an eerie red glow, and somewhere in the distance, they could hear the distinctive shriek of Krillian hunting calls echoing through the corridors. "Sir," Vorn called out urgently. "I'm detecting massive movement on Deck 10. They've reached the civilian shelters. On the security feeds, they could see Krillian warriors stalking through the corridors like living nightmares. Each one stood 3 meters tall, covered in natural armor that had evolved to deflect energy weapons. Their claws could tear through steel, and their teeth could bite through bone. They moved with the fluid grace of apex predators, completely at home in the violence and terror they created. The first screams reached them over the communication system. "Commander," his weapons officer shouted, "I can reroute power from life support to the defensive turrets. We might be able to create a diversion, draw them away from the civilians." "Do it," Zexhai ordered without hesitation. It would mean condemning themselves to a slower death, but if they could buy the civilians even a few more minutes. The lights dimmed as power flowed to their remaining weapons. On the tactical display, Zexhai watched their defense turrets come online one by one. It wasn't much, but it was something. "Target the boarding craft attached to the lower decks," he commanded. "Maybe we can seal those breaches." Their weapons fired in desperate bursts of energy, striking the Krillian ships that had latched onto their hull like metallic parasites. One exploded in a satisfying burst of flame, but 3 more immediately took its place. It was like trying to fight the ocean with a bucket. Another transmission came through, this one on the emergency coalition frequency. Zexhai's hearts leaped with desperate hope until he recognized the voice. "This is Admiral Thorn of the Coalition 4th Fleet," the weary voice announced. "We've received your distress signal, Outpost 7. I'm afraid we cannot provide immediate assistance. Our nearest battle group is 18 cycles away, and we're already engaged with Krillian forces in 3 other systems." There was a pause, heavy with regret. "We're transmitting your request to all available Coalition assets. Hold your position as long as possible. Thorn out. 18 cycles. The civilians would be dead in 18 minutes, let alone 18 cycles." "Commander," his communications officer spoke up hesitantly. "There's something else. I'm picking up a response to our distress signal, but it's not from Coalition forces. Put it through." The voice that came through the speakers was unlike anything Zexhai had ever heard. It was rough, guttural, speaking Galactic Standard with an accent he couldn't identify. But there was something in that voice, a quality that made his survival instincts pay attention. "This is Captain Sarah Chun of the human vessel Defiant. We've intercepted your distress call. Our ship is currently 3 cycles out from your position." There was a pause, and when the voice continued, there was something almost like amusement in it. "We understand you've got some pest control issues. We specialize in that kind of work. Humans." Zexhai had heard of them, though he'd never met one personally. They were one of the newest species to join the Coalition, a young race from a planet called Earth. The reports he'd read described them as unusual. Their homeworld was classified as a Class 12 death world, the kind of place where evolution created things that other species had nightmares about. "This is Commander Zexhai," he replied. "Captain Chun, I appreciate your offer of assistance, but you should know what you're facing. The Krillians aren't just raiders. They're apex predators. Their technology is centuries ahead of ours, and they've never been defeated in open combat. You're talking about one ship against an entire invasion fleet." The human's response was immediate, and there was something in her tone that made Zexhai's skin crawl, not with fear, but with recognition. It was the same tone the Krillian war chief had used, but somehow worse. Where the Krillian had sounded savage and uncontrolled, this human sounded calm, professional, and utterly confident. "Commander, where we come from, that's not a fleet. That's target practice." The transmission paused, and when it resumed, the human's voice had taken on an almost casual tone. "Besides, we've been looking for a good fight. These Krillians sound interesting." Before Zexhai could respond, his tactical officer called out in amazement. "Commander, I'm detecting a massive energy signature dropping out of hyperspace. Distance, 3 light minutes, and closing fast." On the long-range sensors, a single ship appeared. It wasn't particularly large, maybe a third the size of a Krillian dreadnought. But as Zexai studied the readings, his blood ran cold. The energy output from that ship was impossible. No vessel that small should be generating power levels like that. When the name of the ancestors is that thing. Vorn whispered. That, came Captain Chen's voice over the communicator, is a human dreadnought. And we're not alone. As if summoned by her words, more ships began dropping out of hyperspace. Not dozens, hundreds. They came in waves, appearing across the system like deadly flowers blooming in the void. Each one was different, as if they'd been built by different hands for different purposes, but they all radiated the same impossible energy signatures. Captain Chun, Zexheim managed to stammer. Your coalition records indicated that humans had only recently developed faster-than-light travel. How do you have a fleet this size? Oh, that, the human replied with what sounded suspiciously like laughter. We might have been a little modest about our capabilities. See, when you live on a world where everything is trying to kill you from the moment you're born, you tend to develop some survival skills. And when you finally figure out how to leave that world, the transmission paused. Well, let's just say we've been very busy. On the tactical display, Zexai watched in fascination as the human fleet spread out in a formation he didn't recognize. It wasn't the neat, orderly arrangement that coalition forces used. It looked almost organic, like a school of predatory fish moving through water. The Krillian fleet had noticed them too. Their ships were turning away from the outpost, forming their own battle formation. Zexai could imagine the confusion and alarm on their command ships. The Krillians had faced the coalition military before. They knew how those battles went. But this was something new. Krillian vessels. Came another human voice over the open channel, different from Captain Chun, but carrying the same disturbing confidence. This is Admiral Marcus Reed of the Human Defense Fleet. You have 30 seconds to cease your attack on coalition civilians and withdraw from this system. The response from the Krillian war chief was immediate and predictable. Human scum, you dare threaten the Krillian Empire? We will add your skulls to our collection. Admiral Reed's reply was so casual, it was terrifying. 30 seconds is up. All ships, weapons free. Try to leave a few alive for questioning. What happened next will be talked about in military academies for generations. The human ships opened fire, and Zexai realized that everything he thought he knew about space combat was wrong. Coalition weapons were clean, efficient beams of energy designed to disable enemy vessels with minimal loss of life. Even Krillian weapons, savage as they were, followed recognizable patterns of warfare. Human weapons were something else entirely. Missiles that moved faster than anything had a right to move, weaving through space like living things. Energy beams that didn't just punch through armor, but seemed to tear reality itself. And, stranger things, weapons that appeared to bend space around enemy ships, crushing them like invisible fists. But it wasn't just the weapons that were different. It was how the humans fought. Coalition tactics were based on honor, on giving the enemy a fair chance to surrender. Krillian tactics were based on fear and overwhelming force, designed to break the enemy's will to resist. Human tactics were based on one simple principle: win. They didn't fight fair. They didn't give quarter. They didn't show mercy to monsters who would show none in return. They fought like beings who had learned warfare on a world where everything was a predator, and they had become the apex predator of apex predators. A Krillian dreadnought, one of the massive ships that had been methodically tearing apart the outpost, simply disappeared. One moment it was there, and the next it was a cloud of expanding debris. Zexai replayed the sensor data and realized that 3 human ships had fired simultaneously from 3 different angles, their weapons timed to arrive at the exact same instant. "Ow," he whispered. "Coordination," came Captain Chen's voice, as if she'd heard him. "We've been fighting things that move faster and hit harder than your Krillians since before we could walk upright. You learn to work together, or you die." Another Krillian ship exploded, this one torn apart by weapons that seemed to come from nowhere. Zexai realized that some of the human ships weren't showing up on sensors at all. They were somehow invisible, striking from stealth and vanishing again. The Krillian formation began to break apart. These were creatures that lived for battle, that had never known defeat, but they were facing something beyond their comprehension. They were used to being the monsters in the dark. Now, they had met something that made them afraid. "This is War Chief Grizak to all Krillian vessels," came a transmission thick with panic. "Retreat. Fall back to the outer system." But retreat wasn't an option the humans were offering. "Oh, I don't think so." Admiral Reed's voice cut across the channel. "You came here to hunt civilians. Now you get to learn what it feels like to be prey." The human fleet moved like a pack of wolves closing in on wounded prey. Commander Zexai watched in horrified fascination as ships that had seemed spread randomly across space suddenly revealed themselves to be positioned with mathematical precision. Every angle of escape was covered. Every tactical advantage the Krillians might have used was already countered. "Impossible," whispered his tactical officer. "They're hurting them. The entire Krillian fleet is being driven into a kill zone." Zexai could see it now. What had looked like chaotic human ship movements were actually part of a larger pattern. The humans weren't just fighting a battle. They were conducting a hunt. And like any good hunters, they knew how to drive their prey exactly where they wanted them. The Krillian war chief's voice crackled over the communication channel, no longer filled with savage confidence. Now, there was something Zexai had never thought he'd hear from a Krillian: fear. "What are you?" the war chief demanded. "What kind of species builds weapons like these?" Captain Chin's reply came with that same casual tone that was somehow more terrifying than any threat. "We're the species that survived on a planet where the plants are carnivorous. The weather can kill you in minutes, and the harmless animals have venom that can drop a full-grown human in seconds. We're the species that looked at a world trying to murder us every day and decided to fight back." Another Krillian ship died, this one caught in some kind of gravitational weapon that collapsed its hull like a tin can. The debris was immediately consumed by what looked like a controlled black hole that appeared and disappeared in the space of a heartbeat. "You see," continued another human voice, Admiral Reed, "we learned something important during our evolution. The universe is not a safe place. It's not fair. It doesn't care about honor or mercy or giving everyone a fair chance." There was a pause as another Krillian vessel was reduced to scrap metal by weapons that seemed to fire around corners. "So we became something that could survive in that universe. We became something that could thrive in it." On the tactical display, the Krillian formation was collapsing. Ships that had been working together in perfect coordination were now breaking ranks, each captain desperate to save their own vessel. But everywhere they turned, human ships were waiting. "Commander Zexai," came Captain Chin's voice over a private channel. "We're detecting Krillian boarding parties still active inside your station. Are your people trained for close-quarters combat?" Shang. "Negative. We're researchers, scientists, support personnel. We have security teams, but they're not equipped for fighting Krillians in hand-to-hand combat." "Understood. We're sending over some specialists to assist with pest control. Stand by for transport." Before Zexai could ask what that meant, lights began flashing on the transporter platform in the corner of the command center. Coalition transporter technology was clean and quiet, being simply materialized in a soft glow of energy. What appeared on our platform was nothing like that. The air itself seemed to tear open, reality splitting like fabric, and through that impossible gap stepped something. It was roughly human-shaped, but that's where the resemblance to any civilized being ended. It stood nearly as tall as a Krillian, encased in armor that looked like it had been forged in the heart of a star. The armor wasn't just protective. It was alive, somehow, with energy coursing through veins of light that pulsed like a heartbeat. The face behind the helmet's visor was human, but it was the face of someone who had looked into the abyss and decided to move impermanently. Scars covered the visible skin, and the eyes held the kind of calm that came only from absolute certainty in one's ability to inflict violence. Master Sergeant Torres, Human Defense Corps, the figure announced in a voice that sounded like it had been filtered through gravel. I understand you have an infestation problem. More tiers in reality opened around the command center, and more humans stepped through. Each one was different armor, different weapons, different specializations, but they all carried that same terrifying competence. They moved like beings who had been born for war and had spent their entire lives perfecting the art. Sergeant, Zexheim managed to stammer. The Krillians have superior numbers in the lower sections. They're natural hunters, evolved predators. Our security forces couldn't, sir. Torres interrupted with something that might have been respect. With all due respect, we know exactly what Krillians are. We've studied their biology, their psychology, their combat patterns. We know how they hunt, how they think, how they die. He checked a weapon that looked like it could punch holes in starship armor. Where we come from, they'd be considered mid-level threats at best. One of the other humans, a smaller figure whose armor seemed to bend light around it, spoke up. Sergeant, thermal imaging shows approximately 40 Krillians spread across decks 10 through 15. Standard pack hunting formation. 3 civilian shelter areas still showing life signs. Copy that, Ghost. Standard sweep and clear. Torres asked. Negative, Ghost replied. These things like to hunt scared prey. Let's turn that around on them. Horror show protocol. Torres's grin was visible even through his helmet. I like how you think. Wraith, Forge, you're with me. Ghost, Phantom, take the alternate route. Remember, we want them to know we're coming. Fear makes mistakes, and mistakes make this easier. Zexhai watched in bewilderment as the humans split into 2 groups and headed for different exits. Wait, what about coordination? Communication protocols? Tactical support? Torres paused at the doorway and looked back. Sir, we appreciate the concern, but we've been doing this since before your species developed agriculture. We'll have your station cleared in 20 minutes. 20 minutes? But there are 40 Krillians down there. Yes, sir, Torres replied with that casual confidence that was becoming disturbingly familiar. We're hoping to make it interesting by taking our time. As the humans disappeared into the corridors, Zexhai could only stare at his crew. Did he just say they were going to take their time to make it more challenging? His communications officer nodded weakly. I think so, sir. The first screams echoed through the station moments later. But these weren't the terrified cries of civilians. These were the howls of Krillian warriors encountering something they'd never faced before. Something that hunted the hunters. On the security monitors, Zexhai watched in morbid fascination as the humans went to work. They didn't fight like coalition forces, with careful tactics and concern for collateral damage. They didn't fight like Krillians, with savage fury and overwhelming force. They fought like nightmares given form. Torres and his team moved through the corridors like ghosts, appearing suddenly in the Krillians' peripheral vision and vanishing again before the aliens could react. But they weren't hiding, they were playing. Each appearance was calculated to build fear, to make the Krillians understand that they were no longer the predators in this situation. On deck 12, a Krillian warrior rounded a corner and found one of the humans, Forge, according to his armor markings, simply standing in the middle of the corridor, arms crossed, apparently waiting. The Krillian, confused by this display of apparent suicidal courage, charged with claws extended and teeth bared. What happened next defied everything Zexhai thought he knew about combat physics. Forge didn't dodge. He didn't block. He simply moved, and somehow the Krillian charge carried the alien directly into what looked like a controlled explosion. When the smoke cleared, Forge was still standing in the exact same spot, completely unharmed. The Krillian was embedded in the wall behind him. Ow! Zexhai, His tactical officer was studying the sensor readings with disbelief. I don't know, sir. According to these readings, the human didn't actually move at all. But somehow he redirected the Krillian's own momentum and amplified it by a factor of this can't be right. These numbers are impossible. On another monitor, they watched Ghost do something even more disturbing. The humans seemed to simply disappear from the Krillians' visual spectrum while standing directly in front of them. The aliens spun in circles, searching for a target they could smell and hear, but couldn't see, while Ghost calmly walked around them and systematically disabled their weapons and equipment. Active camouflage, Bourne suggested weakly. No, the communications officer replied, staring at her instruments. I'm tracking Ghost's energy signature. She's not using any technology at all. She's just not being seen. Like her nervous system is somehow convincing their brains that she isn't there. The most disturbing display came from the team called Wraith. He didn't seem to fight the Krillians so much as erase them. Zexai would see a group of aliens stalking through a corridor, and then Wraith would step out of what looked like solid wall, touch one of them, and the Krillian would simply stop. Not dead, not unconscious, just stopped, as if someone had disconnected their consciousness from their body. What kind of training produces warriors like this? Zexai asked no one in particular. His question was answered by Captain Chen's voice over the communicator. Commander, you're watching humans who volunteered for the Defense Corps. Every one of them grew up on Earth, where survival isn't just about being stronger or faster. It's about being smarter, more adaptable, more ruthless than everything else that wants to eat you. But they're so calm about it, his communications officer protested. They're not even breathing hard. That's because this isn't hard for them, Chen replied. Krillians are apex predators on their homeworlds, but Earth produced thousands of apex predator species. Humans survived by becoming better predators than all of them. What you're seeing isn't exceptional for us. It's Tuesday. On the displays, the systematic elimination of the Krillian boarding parties continued. But it wasn't random slaughter. It was precise, professional, almost artistic in its execution. The humans weren't just killing the invaders. They were sending a message to any survivors. Sergeant Torres to command, came the voice over the communicator. Lower decks are secure. All civilians accounted for and unharmed. 37 Krillian warriors eliminated. 3 captured for intelligence gathering. Zexai checked his chronometer and felt his blood chill. Sergeant, that was 12 minutes. You said 20. Yes, sir. We finished early. Turns out they weren't as interesting as we hoped. Outside the station, the space battle was reaching its conclusion. The Krillian fleet, once a perfectly coordinated invasion force, had been reduced to scattered survivors desperately trying to flee. But the human ships pursued them with the patience of experienced hunters, picking off stragglers and preventing any organized escape. War Chief Grizak to any remaining Krillian vessels came a transmission filled with panic. Fall back to hyperspace coordinates 77 Alpha. We must warn the Empire about these demons. Admiral Reed's response was immediate and final. I'm afraid we can't allow that. The last Krillian dreadnought, War Chief Grizak's flagship, had almost reached the edge of the system when space itself seemed to fold around it. One moment it was accelerating toward the hyperspace jump point, and the next it was simply gone, vanishing into what looked like a controlled singularity. All Krillian vessels neutralized, reported one of the human ship commanders. No survivors, no escapees. The invasion fleet has been completely eliminated. The silence that followed was deafening. Commander Zexai, came Captain Chen's voice, now sounding almost conversational. Your station is secure. Our medical teams are standing by if you need assistance with casualties, and our engineering corps can help with repairs. Zexai looked around his command center. His crew was staring at the displays, showing empty space where, minutes ago, a massive invasion fleet had been tearing their station apart. The tactical readouts showed no hostile contacts. The proximity alarms were silent. Emergency lights had returned to normal. It was over. Just like that. Captain Chun, he managed to say, how many ships did you lose? None. We had some minor damage to hull plating on a few vessels, but nothing serious. Casualties? None. Zexai felt his legs give out, and he collapsed into his command chair. You destroyed an entire Krillian invasion fleet, something that has never been done before in recorded history. And You didn't lose a single ship or a single person. There was a pause, and when Shin spoke again, there was something almost apologetic in her tone. Commander, I think you might have some misconceptions about human military capabilities. The fleet you just saw wasn't our military. It was a patrol group. A small one. A patrol group? We've been monitoring Krillian expansion for several years now. When they started moving into coalition space, we decided it was time to discourage that kind of behavior. This was just the first lesson. Zexai's mind reeled. If that was just a patrol group, what does your actual military look like? The silence that followed was somehow more terrifying than any answer could have been. Finally, Admiral Reed spoke up. Commander, let me put this in perspective for you. The fleet you saw today represents about 0.1% of human deep space assets. We've been preparing for contact with hostile alien species since before we left our solar system. We learned very early that the universe is not a friendly place. But the Coalition records were accurate as far as they went. Captain Chun interrupted gently. We are new to faster-than-light travel. What we didn't mention was that we've been using generation ships to spread across the galaxy for over 2,000 years. We've been fighting things like the Krillians for longer than your species has had written language. Master Sergeant Torres's voice came over the station intercom. Commander, we've finished securing the lower decks. The Krillians had some interesting equipment with them. Looks like they were planning to use your civilians for biological experiments. We've also recovered their intelligence data. Turns out this wasn't just a raid. This was a scouting mission for a full-scale invasion of Coalition space. The weight of that statement settled over the command center like a suffocating blanket. How large an invasion? Zexai asked weakly. According to their data, approximately 12,000 ships spread across 4 separate fleets. They were planning to hit every major Coalition world simultaneously. The number was so large, it was almost meaningless. 12,000 ships. The entire Coalition military had maybe 300 vessels, and most of those were exploration ships with minimal weapons. Captain Chun, Zexai said quietly, what happens now? Now. Chin's voice carried that same casual tone that had terrified the Krillians. Now we go have a conversation with the Krillian Empire. We're going to explain some new rules to them. Rules about what happens when someone threatens human allies. And if they don't listen? Commander, Admiral Reed spoke up. Where humans come from, we have a saying, speak softly and carry a big stick. We've been speaking softly for quite a while now. I think it's time we showed them the stick. In the distance, space began to shimmer as more ships dropped out of hyperspace. But these weren't the relatively small human vessels they'd seen before. These were massive constructs that dwarfed anything in the Coalition or Krillian fleets, ships that looked like they'd been built to fight wars against entire species. Zexai realized that everything was about to change. The careful balance of power in the galaxy, the delicate peace between species, the very nature of interstellar politics, all of it was about to be rewritten. And the beings doing the rewriting were the same species that had asked if they could help with pest control. 3 days after the Battle of Outpost 7, Commander Zexai found himself aboard a human dreadnought called the Inevitable, traveling through hyperspace toward the heart of the Krillian Empire. The ship was beyond anything he had imagined possible. Corridors wide enough for entire brigades to march through, weapons that required their own dedicated power cores, and shields that could probably withstand a direct hit from a star. But it wasn't the ship's massive scale that unsettled him. It was how comfortable the humans seemed aboard what was essentially a mobile weapon of mass destruction. Crew members went about their duties with casual efficiency, as if commanding the power to crack planets was just another day at the office. Commander, came a familiar voice behind him. Captain Sarachan approached with 2 steaming cups of something the humans called coffee. You look like you could use this. Zexai accepted the cup gratefully. The bitter beverage was an acquired taste, but it helped settle his nerves. Captain, I still don't understand why you brought me along for this diplomatic mission. Chin's laugh was genuinely amused. Is that what we're calling it? I suppose that's technically accurate. She gestured toward the massive viewport where stars streaked past in the kaleidoscope patterns of hyperspace. We brought you because the Coalition needs to understand what's about to happen. and because someone needs to witness what we're going to show the Krillians, which is the truth about human civilization. Before Zexai could ask what that meant, an announcement echoed through the ship's communication system. All hands, prepare for hyperspace exit in 30 minutes. Destination, Krillax Prime. Krillax Prime, the home world of the Krillian Empire, a fortress world that had never been successfully attacked in over 3,000 years of interstellar warfare. It was surrounded by defense platforms that could vaporize entire fleets, protected by planetary shields that had withstood the combined assault of 6 different species, and guarded by the most vicious warrior culture in known space. Captain, Zexai said carefully, the intelligence reports indicate that Krillax Prime is defended by over 2,000 warships and 47 orbital defense platforms. Each platform has firepower equivalent to a coalition dreadnought. I know, Chen replied, sipping her coffee. Admiral Reed reviewed the intelligence data. He said it looked like a reasonable challenge for a Tuesday. Zexai was beginning to understand that human definitions of reasonable bore no resemblance to those of any other species. Commander, called a voice from across the bridge. You might want to see this. They approached one of the tactical stations where a young human officer was manipulating a 3-dimensional hologram, showing the space around Krillax Prime. The display revealed a massive concentration of Krillian military might, more ships than Zexai had ever seen in one place. Current Krillian deployment around their home world, the officer explained. 2,437 active warships, ranging from destroyers to super dreadnoughts. 47 orbital platforms, as you mentioned, plus planetary defense grids covering every major population center. And our fleet? Zexai asked. 16 ships, Chen replied casually. 16. Zexai's voice cracked. Captain, even with your advanced technology, the odds are overwhelming in our favor, interrupted Admiral Reed as he joined them. Commander, you're still thinking about this in terms of conventional warfare. What you witnessed at Outpost 7 wasn't us showing off. It was us being polite. The Admiral manipulated the holographic display, zooming in on the human fleet formation. Each of these 16 ships represents about 2,000 years of human engineering development. They're not just warships. They're mobile civilizations designed to operate independently for centuries if necessary. As if to emphasize the point, the ship around them gave a subtle vibration, and Zexai felt the familiar sensation of dropping out of hyperspace. Through the viewport, the Krillian homeworld appeared, a dark red planet surrounded by a glittering constellation of defensive installations. Incoming transmission from Krillian High Command, announced the communications officer. Put it through, Admiral Reed ordered. The face that appeared on the main display was even more terrifying than the war chief they'd encountered at Outpost 7. This was clearly a Krillian of high rank, with scars that told of countless victories and trophies from dozens of conquered species. When it spoke, its voice carried the authority of absolute power. Human vessels, you have violated the sovereign space of the Krillian Empire. Surrender immediately or be destroyed. Admiral Reed stepped forward, his hands clasped behind his back in a posture of relaxed confidence. This is Admiral Marcus Reed of the Human Defense Fleet. We're here to discuss recent Krillian activities in Coalition space, specifically your unprovoked attacks on civilian installations. The weak Coalition serves at our pleasure, the Krillian leader snarled. We take what we will when we will. Your pathetic species will learn this truth before we consume your worlds. I see, Reed replied calmly. In that case, I think a demonstration is in order. All ships implement Protocol 7. Zexai had no idea what Protocol 7 was, but the effect was immediate and terrifying. The space around the 16 human ships began to shimmer, and suddenly, the tactical displays were showing energy readings that defied comprehension. What's happening? He whispered to Captain Chun. We're dropping our stealth measures, she replied matter-of-factly. The implications of that simple statement hit him like a physical blow. Stealth measures? You mean there are more ships? On the tactical display, the space around Krillax Prime was suddenly filled with thousands of contacts that hadn't been there moments before. Sleek vessels that seemed to bend light around themselves. Massive constructs that looked more like mobile space stations and ships, and things that were so alien in design that HFY couldn't even classify them as vessels. Correction, Admiral Reed announced to the Krillian leader, whose expression had shifted from arrogant confidence to dawning horror. We brought 16 ships that you could see. The rest of the fleet was waiting to see if diplomacy would work. The numbers on the tactical display were staggering. Over 8,000 human vessels had just materialized around Krillax Prime, completely surrounding the planet and its defenses. But it wasn't just the numbers, it was the power readings. Each human ship was generating energy levels that exceeded anything in Krillian technology. Impossible, the Krillian leader whispered. We would have detected— No, Reed interrupted gently. You really wouldn't have. Human stealth technology was developed specifically to hide from beings with superior sensory capabilities. On Earth, we call that evolutionary necessity. One of the human tactical officers spoke up. Admiral, Krillian defense platforms are powering up weapons. Should we respond? Please do, Reed replied. But keep it proportional. We don't want to destroy anything important on the first day. What happened next redefined HFY's understanding of space combat. The Krillian orbital platforms opened fire with weapons that could shatter moons. Beams of energy that had never failed to destroy enemy vessels lanced out toward the human fleet. They simply disappeared. Not deflected, not absorbed. The weapon's fire just ceased to exist as if it had never been fired at all. Energy sinks, Captain Chun explained, noticing HFY's confusion. We've learned to manipulate space-time on a localized level. Those weapons are firing into artificially created null space pockets. Meanwhile, the human response was almost artistic in its precision. Instead of returning fire with overwhelming force, they demonstrated their capabilities with surgical strikes. A Krillian super dreadnought suddenly found its engines disconnected from the rest of the ship. Not destroyed, just carefully removed and set floating nearby. An orbital platform had its weapons systematically disassembled while leaving the rest of the structure completely intact. This is a warning, Admiral Reed announced over the open channel. We are here to establish new rules of engagement between the Krillian Empire and human-protected species. Rule 1. You do not attack civilian populations. Rule 2. You do not invade coalition space. Rule 3. You do not threaten Earth or her allies. And if we refuse, the Krillian leader demanded, though his voice had lost much of its earlier confidence. Admiral Reed's smile was visible even across the communication channel. Then we stopped being polite. To emphasize the point, one of the larger human vessels, something that looked like a cross between a battleship and a mobile factory, began to demonstrate what HFY could only describe as industrial-scale construction. In the space of minutes, it fabricated what appeared to be a small moon, complete with its own defensive systems and habitat modules. We call that a rapid deployment colony, Captain Chun explained casually. Standard human technology for establishing permanent settlements in hostile environments. Construction time for a fully functional world, approximately 6 hours. The implication was staggering. If humans could build worlds in 6 hours, what could they destroy in the same time? You're not just a military force, HFY realized aloud. You're an entire civilization that's prepared for interstellar war. Every human colony ship is also a factory ship and a military vessel, Admiral Reed confirmed. When you grow up on a planet where the environment itself is trying to kill you, you learn to be prepared for anything. The Krillian leader's image flickered, and when he spoke again, it was with the tone of someone trying to negotiate from a position of complete weakness. What do you want? Peace, Reed replied simply. We want the Krillian Empire to understand that the galaxy is large enough for multiple apex predator species, but only if those species can coexist without consuming each other's young. You're offering us a choice, the Krillian said slowly. Yes, evolve into something that can share the galaxy or be treated as an extinction-level threat to galactic civilization. The silence that followed stretched for long minutes. Finally, the Krillian leader spoke again, his voice careful and measured. What would this coexistence require? Admiral Reed gestured, and the tactical display changed to show a map of the galaxy with clearly marked territorial boundaries. The Krillian Empire maintains sovereignty over its current core worlds. Expansion is permitted only into uninhabited systems, and only with the consent of any species that claims territorial rights to those systems. Civilian populations of all species are absolutely protected. Attacks on non-military targets will be met with immediate retaliation. And in return, humanity recognizes the Krillian Empire as a sovereign power and offers trade relationships, technology exchanges, and mutual defense agreements against external threats. Zexai listened to this exchange with growing amazement. The humans weren't just offering peace, they were offering partnership. They were treating the Krillians not as conquered enemies, but as potential allies who needed guidance in learning to live in a civilized galaxy. There is one more thing, Admiral Reed continued. All Krillian military assets withdraw from Coalition territories immediately. Any Krillian vessels found in Coalition space without explicit permission will be discouraged. Discouraged? The Krillian leader asked. Reed's smile became significantly less friendly. Yes, we're very good at discouraging unwanted behavior. The Krillian leader looked at something off-screen, probably consulting with his advisors. We looked back, his expression had changed. For the first time, Zexai saw something in a Krillian's face that he'd never expected. Respect. Admiral Reed, the Krillian said formally, I am War Master Thrax, Supreme Commander of Krillian military forces. On behalf of the Krillian Empire, I accept your terms. We will withdraw from Coalition space immediately. Excellent, Reed replied. We'll establish formal diplomatic protocols over the next few cycles. Captain Chun will remain in system with a small fleet to monitor the transition and assist with any misunderstandings that might arise. As the transmission ended, Zexai felt his legs give out again. He sank into a nearby chair and stared at the tactical display showing the peaceful coexistence of human and Krillian fleets around the former enemy homeworld. That's it, he asked weakly. No massive battle, no destruction of planets, no epic struggle between civilizations. Captain Chun refilled his coffee cup. Commander, humans learned a long time ago that the best victory is the one where your enemy becomes your ally. We've had enough wars on Earth to understand that destroying your opponent is often less useful than converting them. But what if they had refused? What if they had chosen to fight? Admiral Reed, overhearing the question, turned from his conversation with the tactical staff. Then, we would have shown them what human warfare looks like when we're not being polite. The Admiral manipulated the tactical display one more time, and Zexai saw something that made his blood freeze. Hidden throughout the system, invisible even to the most advanced sensors, were weapons that defied description. Planet crackers that could split worlds apart at the molecular level. Star killers that could trigger fleet destroyers that could eliminate thousands of ships in seconds. We didn't come here to fight a war, Commander, Reed explained gently. We came here to prevent one. Sometimes the best way to avoid a fight is to demonstrate that you're so overwhelmingly prepared for violence that violence becomes unnecessary. Zexai stared at the display for a long time, trying to process the implications of what he was seeing. Finally, he looked up at the humans around him, beings who could casually discuss cracking planets and triggering supernovas while drinking coffee and making pleasant conversation. What are you? He whispered. Captain Chin's smile was warm and genuinely human. We're what happens when a species spends 2 million years learning to survive on the most dangerous planet in the galaxy. We're what evolution creates when everything else is trying to kill you from the moment you're born. She paused, looking out at the stars visible through the viewport. But mostly, Commander, we're your allies. And that's something the galaxy is going to have to get used to. 6 months after what historians would later call the Krillax Accords, Commander Zexai stood in the observation deck of Coalition Central Command, watching the most impossible sight in galactic history. A joint human-Krillian construction project assembling a massive space station in orbit around the Coalition capital world. The station wasn't just large, it was the size of small moon, with sections clearly designed by different species. Human engineering created flowing, organic shapes that seemed to grow rather than being built. Krillian architecture favored aggressive angles and practical fortifications. Coalition design principles emphasized harmony and aesthetic balance. Somehow, impossibly, it all worked together. "The Harmony Station," said Admiral Reed, joining him at the observation window. "A joint research and defense facility representing the first cooperative effort between three major galactic civilizations. Not bad for 6 months' work." Zexai shook his head in wonder. "I still can't believe this is real. 6 months ago, the Krillians were preparing to exterminate every coalition world. Now, they're working alongside us to build the most advanced research facility in the galaxy." "Humans are very good at making friends out of enemies," Reed replied. "It's a survival skill we developed out of necessity." Through the viewport, they could see human, Krillian, and coalition work crews coordinating their efforts with surprising efficiency. The sight of Krillian warriors and coalition scientists working side by side was surreal enough, but the humans moved between both groups as natural mediators, somehow bridging the gap between two completely incompatible cultures. "Admiral," Zexai said carefully, "there's something I've been meaning to ask. The Coalition has been analyzing the technology humans have shared with us, and our scientists keep finding things that don't make sense. Such as the weapons you used against the Krillians. According to our best understanding of physics, some of them shouldn't be possible. Energy sinks that create null space pockets, gravitational weapons that can appear and disappear at will, materials that seem to exist in multiple dimensions simultaneously." Admiral Reed was quiet for a long moment, watching the construction work continue outside. When he spoke, his voice carried a weight that Zexai hadn't heard before. "Commander, what I'm about to tell you is classified at the highest levels of human government. The Coalition Council has been briefed, but this information hasn't been shared with the general population of any species." Zexai felt his heart begin to race. What information? Humans aren't the only species on Earth. The simple statement hit him like a physical blow. "What do you mean?" Reed gestured toward the construction site outside. "What you're looking at isn't just human technology. It's collaborative technology developed by multiple intelligent species over the course of several thousand years. But the reports are accurate. As far as they go," Reed interrupted gently. "Humans are the dominant sapient species on Earth, and we are the ones who developed faster-than-light travel. But Earth is complicated." Before Zexai could ask for clarification, a new voice joined the conversation. "Perhaps I should explain." Zexai turned and found himself facing what appeared to be a human in a coalition uniform. But something was wrong with the proportions. Too tall, too graceful, with eyes that reflected light in ways that human eyes shouldn't. "Commander Zexai," Admiral Reed said formally, "allow me to introduce Senior Advisor Moonwhisper of the Terran Collective." "Advisor," Zexai managed to stammer, "you're not human." Moonwhisper smiled, and suddenly Zexai could see the subtle differences more clearly. The ears were slightly pointed, the facial structure more refined than human standard, and there was something about the way they moved that suggested bones might be hollow. "I am Alpher," Moonwhisper explained. "What your mythologies might call elves, though that's not entirely accurate. My people have shared Earth with humans for approximately 50,000 years." Zexai's mind reeled. Shared Earth? But the reports said humans were the only intelligent species on the planet. "Humans are the only species that openly claims dominion over the planet," Admiral Reed corrected. "The Alpher, the Deep Dwellers, the Sky Singers, the Sea Wraiths, they all chose different paths. Some withdrew from the surface world. Others learned to live in the spaces humans don't typically occupy. The weapons technology you've been analyzing," Moonwhisper continued, "represents the combined knowledge of 7 different intelligent species. Humans provided the industrial capacity and the the drive to explore space. We provided other things. What kind of other things? Moon Whisper gestured, and the air around them shimmered. Suddenly, HFY could see additional layers of reality superimposed over the normal view. Energy patterns flowed through space in complex mathematical forms. Gravitational fields bent and twisted in ways that defied physics. And the construction project outside was revealed to be far more complex than anything visible to normal senses. The universe has more dimensions than most species perceive, Moon Whisper explained as the enhanced vision faded. Humans excel at understanding and manipulating three-dimensional space. Alphas specialize in four-dimensional manipulation. The Deep Dwellers work with quantum mechanics at the subatomic level. The Sky's Singers understand gravitational harmonics. Working together, Admiral Reed continued, we've developed technologies that no single species could have achieved alone. The result is what you saw at Outpost 7 and Krillax Prime. HFY slumped against the observation window. So the human fleet that saved us wasn't entirely human at all. Oh, it was human, Reed assured him. Every ship was crewed by humans, commanded by human officers, following human military doctrine. But the technology they used, the capabilities they demonstrated, that represents the collective achievement of Terran civilization. Why didn't you tell us this from the beginning? Moon Whisper and Reed exchanged glances. Because, Reed said carefully, most species aren't ready to learn that what they consider impossible is just a matter of perspective. The Coalition has spent thousands of years developing a stable, peaceful civilization based on clearly understood scientific principles. Learning that those principles are incomplete tends to destabilize governments. Also, Moon Whisper added with a slight smile, humans have a talent for making first impressions that other species remember. Sometimes it's easier to let them take credit for achievements that were truly collaborative. An alert chimed, and Admiral Reed checked his communicator. Commander, you might want to see this. We're receiving a transmission from the edge of the galaxy. They made their way to the communications center, where Coalition officers were working frantically at control stations. The main display showed a star map with a pulsing red indicator at the very edge of known space. Report, Admiral Reed ordered. Sir, the communications officer replied, we're detecting a massive hyperspace disturbance approaching from intergalactic space. Whatever it is, it's big. Initial estimates suggest a fleet of approximately 100,000 vessels. HFY felt his blood turn cold. 100,000? What species has that kind of military capability? Unknown, sir, the officer continued. But they're broadcasting on all frequencies in a language our computers can't translate. Put it through, Reed ordered. The speakers crackled with static, and then a voice emerged, alien beyond anything HFY had ever heard. It sounded like multiple voices speaking in unison, creating harmonics that hurt to listen to. Inferior biological constructs, the voice announced, each word dripping with contempt. This galaxy has been designated for resource extraction. All sapient species will be processed for useful components. Resistance will result in immediate vaporization. The transmission cut off, leaving the communications center in stunned silence. Well, Admiral Reed said calmly, that's unfortunate. Unfortunate. HFY's voice cracked. Admiral, we're talking about an invasion fleet that makes the Krillians look like a minor border dispute. Yes, it does rather put things in perspective, doesn't it? Before HFY could ask what that meant, another voice joined the conversation. This one was distinctly Krillian, but speaking in tones of respect rather than aggression. Admiral Reed, this is War Master Thrax. Our long-range sensors have detected the approaching fleet. With your permission, we'd like to contribute to the defensive planning. Permission granted, War Master. How quickly can you mobilize your forces? Our entire military can be ready for deployment in 2 cycles. We have approximately 8,000 ships available for immediate action. Excellent. Commander HFY, what about Coalition forces? HFY tried to think past his panic. We can mobilize perhaps 300 vessels, but, Admiral, even combined with human and Krillian fleets, we're still talking about facing odds of 20 to 1. Actually, came a new voice. The odds are considerably better than that. Everyone turned to see Moon Whisper entering the communications center, but they weren't alone. Behind them came beings that Zexhai had never seen before, tall, pale figures with eyes like black holes, creatures that seemed to be made of living crystal, others that appeared to phase in and out of visible reality. The Terran Collective has been monitoring this approach for several days, Moon Whisper explained. What you're seeing on your sensors is indeed a massive fleet, but it's not just an invasion force. It's an entire mobile civilization, a species that consumes galaxies for resources and then moves on to the next target. One of the crystalline beings spoke, its voice like chimes in a windstorm. We are the Deep Dwellers. These entities call themselves the Harvesters. They have consumed 17 galaxies in the past million years. They view biological life as an inefficient use of matter. How do you know this? Admiral Reed asked. Because, said one of the phasing beings, we encountered their scouts several centuries ago. We are the Sky Singers, and we have been preparing for their eventual arrival. Zexhai looked around at the assembled beings, trying to process what he was seeing. You've all been preparing for this? For centuries. Earth species have learned to think in long-term survival strategies, Moon Whisper explained. When we detected signs of the Harvester's approach, we began developing countermeasures. What kind of countermeasures? Zexhai asked weakly. Admiral Reed smiled, and there was something in that expression that reminded Zexhai powerfully of the moment when Captain Chun had first offered to help with pest control. The kind that require the combined resources of 3 galaxies to implement, Reed replied. Commander, remember when we told you that the human fleet you saw at Krillax Prime represented a small fraction of our total capabilities? Yes, we may have understated that somewhat. The main display changed to show a galactic map, but this one revealed something that made Zexhai's mind shut down completely. Throughout the galaxy, scattered across thousands of systems, were installations that his sensors had never detected. Massive constructions that dwarfed anything he'd ever imagined, connected by energy networks that spanned entire spiral arms. Over the past 2,000 years, Moon Whisper explained, while human colony ships were spreading across the galaxy, they were also building defense networks, manufacturing centers, resource extraction facilities, research installations. All of it hidden, all of it waiting. Waiting for what? For something like this? Admiral Reed replied. Earth species learned early that survival sometimes requires preparing for threats you hope will never come. One of the phasing beings, a Sky Singer, gestured, and the display zoomed in on a section of space that appeared empty. The Harvesters believe they are approaching a galaxy populated by primitive biological species. They have no idea they are entering the territory of a civilization that has been preparing for their arrival for over a millennium. How many ships do we actually have? Zexhai asked in a whisper. Ships? Admiral Reed looked confused. Commander, we stopped thinking in terms of ships about 500 years ago. The display changed again, showing the true scope of Terran defensive preparations. It wasn't a fleet, it was an entire galactic civilization that had been disguised as scattered, primitive colonies. The space between stars was filled with installations that could manufacture fleets in hours. The stars themselves have been modified to serve as power sources for weapons that could destroy solar systems. The Harvesters think they're invading a galaxy, Moon Whisper said with satisfaction. What they're actually doing is walking into the largest trap in universal history. Zexhai looked at the beings around him. Humans, Alpha, Krillians, Deep Dwellers, Sky Singers, and others he couldn't even identify. Species that had learned to work together despite completely different evolutionary paths, united by the shared understanding that survival sometimes required preparation for the impossible. You're not just allies, he realized. You're not even just a civilization. You're evolution perfected. You're what happens when intelligent species learn to cooperate instead of compete. Admiral Reed nodded. Earth taught us that the universe is a dangerous place. But it also taught us that the best way to face danger is together. The communications system crackled again with the harsh voices of the harvesters. Biological constructs of this galaxy, you have one solar cycle to prepare for processing. Resistance is futile. Your matter will be reclaimed. Admiral Reed stepped up to the communication console and opened a response channel. When he spoke, his voice carried the casual confidence that Zexai had learned to associate with humans discussing pest control. Harvester Fleet, this is Admiral Marcus Reed, speaking for the Galactic Defense Alliance. You're entering territory that's already occupied by an apex predator civilization. We suggest you find another galaxy. The response was immediate and filled with mechanical laughter. Apex predators? Biological entities cannot achieve apex status. We are the ultimate expression of evolution. Perfect machines consuming imperfect matter. That's an interesting theory, Reed replied. We look forward to testing it. As the transmission ended, alarms began sounding throughout Coalition Central Command. But these weren't the panicked warnings of an impending disaster. They were the controlled, methodical alerts of a defensive system coming online. Across the galaxy, hidden installations began to activate. Ancient technologies developed by species that had been preparing for this moment for 1,000 years started to hum with power. The trap that had taken centuries to build was finally about to be sprung. Zexai watched the displays, showing defensive networks that spanned entire star systems, weapons that could manipulate the fundamental forces of reality, and fleets that could be manufactured faster than they could be destroyed. He thought about the journey that had brought him here, from a desperate commander calling for reinforcements to a witness of the greatest military mobilization in galactic history. They asked for reinforcements, he murmured to himself. What's that, Commander? Admiral Reed asked. Zexai smiled, finally, understanding the true scope of what he'd witnessed. 6 months ago, we asked for reinforcements to deal with a Krillian invasion force. What arrived were Deathworlders who had been preparing for a war against entities that consume galaxies. Admiral Reed's grin was fierce and proud. Commander, you haven't seen anything yet. What you witnessed at Outpost 7 was us being polite. What you saw at Krillax Prime was us conducting diplomacy. He gestured toward the displays, showing the true extent of galactic defenses. What's about to happen to the Harvesters is us defending our home. Outside, space began to shimmer as the first wave of defensive systems came online. The galaxy was about to show the Harvesters what happened when machines tried to harvest a civilization that had been forged in the fires of the most dangerous planets in the universe. The Deathworlders were going to war, and they were very good at it.